I'm going to talk a little bit now about snap points. And snap points is a feature, even though it's documented in the manual, you wouldn't really know it's there unless you happened upon it. Now, what a snap point is it allows you to be able to use it as a guide, to be able to always snap to a certain spot on your object. And to create a snap point, you would hold down the Alt key on the PC or Option key on the Mac and click on your object. Now, once you do that, you'll see a little dot appear. And if I rotate my object, you'll see that the dot is kind of affixed to the object. Now, that dot won't render, it's just a reference point. And what that does is it allows your brush, and if I go to a normal brush so you can see the brush here, once it gets within a certain radius, it will snap to that point so that the brush always is locked to that point, basically giving you a way to always be able to work at that specific area and keeping your brush aligned with that point. Now, you may have noticed in Preferences that there is a reference to snap points under Display. You'll see a snap radius. Now, this is the amount of pixels on the screen, basically, that is the radius from which your mouse cursor will snap to that point. So right now, when my mouse cursor gets within 7 pixels of that snap point, it will snap to it. If I want to have more of a snap to it, let's make it 20. And go ahead and click OK. Now if I get within 20 pixels, and you'll notice it'll snap sooner the closer I get to it. And so if you're having a hard time making sure that you're lined up, you can always change your snap radius to make sure that it actually snaps to that really well. Now, what snap points are good for, and let me go ahead and go back to my front view. Now, what snap points are really good for is for being able to line up your brush so you always keep different radiuses of your brush tools centered on themselves. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my symmetry is set to split. Like for example, I'm going to try to do like eye sockets on this object. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just push straight in. So now if I push on this object, since I'm using snap points, it's pushing directly on the object. Now if I were to make the radius smaller and pull out on this, now since the radius is smaller but still snapping to that point, it's going to be perfectly centered now within inside the first brush stroke that I did. So now I can actually make this type of modification to the object and get these to be perfectly centered inside there. So if you want to do a ridge around, say, a horn on a character, it'd be really easy to, if you use a snap point, to be able to make the ridge first, then pull out the horn, or so that you can get a nice ridge around it without having to go in and do it by hand and hope that you can get it perfectly around if you want to have it perfectly symmetrical. So that's where snap points can come handy, is to make sure that you can get your radius of your brush to line up with a previous brush stroke that you've done. Now, this also works really well with paint, and where I like to use this is for creating something like an eyeball. Now, I'll show you that in a minute, but first thing I'd like to show you is that if you want to remove a snap point, you can just hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the snap point and it'll go away. So if you want to delete snap points, you can do it that way. But let's go ahead and create this eyeball I was talking about. Now, what I'm going to do is go to front view, and let's first go ahead and just give this a base color. So I'll go ahead and fill this with a base color. And then I'm going to go to Effects here and do a Paint Veins, and I've got kind of a pink color going on here. So I'll go ahead and use that. Paint Veins for my eyeball. And then I'm going to go back into Paint. And now what I want to do is create the iris and then the pupil. And so what I want to do is I'm going to create my snap point here close to center as I can. Create it there. And now what I'm going to do is pick kind of a greenish color for the iris of the eye. And I'll get my brush tool, and we'll pick kind of a more round tool so that it gets a nice hard edge on the eye, and make my radius about there. And I gotta make sure I'm direction. I'm going to snap there and paint the iris. So now you can see that I've got this nice iris there. And now what the snap point actually comes in handy is where now I want to paint the pupil, and I just make the radius smaller about where I want my pupil to be. And then I snap to the point, fill it. And so now it's perfectly centered. And now I'm able to use that snap point to line up that on the eye of this paint. And that's basically how you can use snap points to center your multiple brush strokes to be able to have better control over the modeling of your object.